So, life sucks for people like us right now. And the best we can do at the moment is survive and protest. And I really mean that. The tides can change. Survive, but protest more directly if you have the means. Get in touch with your local legislators if possible. Otherwise, do whatever you can to support the LGBTQIA+, and especially trans and genderqueer people in your life. Let them know you support them, especially if you have a platform. Give what you can to charities that are currently fighting for our rights, and do what you can to make sure your trans friends are safe with you. Help any way you can, even if it's not very much. If any cis allies or people who just don't understand us are still watching, I recommend listening to trans people when we tell you our stories. Listen to us when we tell you our needs. Listen to us when we tell you our feelings. And please, please believe us. As for me, I could try to make educational content to help more people understand the danger we are in and what we need, but more qualified people have already made a ton of that. Plus, I already gave my 2 cents in the anti-woke internet discourse I bore witness to, so check that out when you're done with this video. While I'm not able to do much with my platform, there is one thing I can do. The one thing I made this channel to do. Recommend something to help my fellow trans folks and lift their spirits just a bit. A lot of us suffer from anxiety and depression, myself included, and we need some joy in our lives. The topic of today is webcomics. As if this video wasn't heavy enough already. Webcomics have a bit of an infamous reputation on this platform. Greedy exploitative companies, fanatical fan bases, and toxic story promotion. And while all that is very true, I don't think it should dismiss the merits of the art. One might argue that said good art is difficult to find because of the deluge of shit, but you could say the same about YouTube. Yet, you're still watching this video. And thanks to the lack of corporate oversight, artists and authors have a lot more freedom to make whatever they want. And that can manifest in positive ways. There are still diamonds in the rough, and that's what this video is for. I've read countless webcomics, and today I've got 18 to recommend. Some are about trans women, some about trans men, some about characters that are in between, and a few fantasy comics that happen to have a few trans characters, 2 of which use the lens of fantasy to deconstruct the idea of gender and how our society perceives it. The last category is one I'd recommend even to cis allies who just happen to like fantasy, and if you're looking for a specific type, I've included timecodes to make finding them easier. If you're new here, hello, I am Kylan Mythos, asexual, demi-romantic, trans, non-binary specifically, bi-gender, and I've been medically transitioning for about a year and a half. My identity is a combo of the masculine and the feminine, and while I am assigned male at birth trans-feminine, I have done what I can to find something for my trans-masc viewers, and if you happen to be a trans-masc viewer who's read one of these comics, or you've got something of your own to recommend, feel free to leave it in the comments. So with all that said, let's get started. Starting with the ladies.
What's up?
I just want to be a cute anime girl.
What?
Starting off, we have the quintessential trans girl webcomic. I Want to Be a Cute Anime Girl by Azul Crescent, a story about a little, air quotes, boy who is dressed up as a girl as a joke, realizing that, air quotes, he liked it. So she begins the process of becoming Cheryl, and we see her going to the store to buy girl clothes for the first time, experimenting with presentation, coming out to friends, and dealing with her continued dysphoria, which is only more prominent now that Cheryl knows who she is. Though, unlike most of the other comics I've gone over today, the author does this funny thing in the earlier chapters, where Cheryl hasn't realized she's trans, and has to get a bit educated on what her feelings actually mean. Confronting how she really feels sends her into a bit of an existential crisis. Don't worry, she does get better. On top of that, we've more recently gotten the introduction of a trans-masculine character whose identity has just started getting explored in the comic. And like everything else in this story, it comes out in hilarious fashion. If it wasn't obvious, this comic is so funny. Like, it has the best humor out of any other comic in this video. It's also incredibly wholesome. I've gone back and reread earlier pages whenever I need a pick-me-up, and this comic always delivers. If you're looking for trans joy, look no further than this. Next up, we have another webtoon about a trans girl discovering herself, but she goes through some more trauma than Cheryl in the process. The Prettiest Platypus by Platypus Pro. This one is about a trans girl named Lily who has recently started at a new school and is welcomed into a friend group after almost getting bullied. She hears from a friend about what being trans is, and after reading a book with a very overt trans allegory and doing some research out of curiosity, she realizes that she could be a trans girl, and after trying some things out, namely pronouns and presentation, comes to the conclusion that she definitely is one. Unfortunately, Lily doesn't have supportive parents. What she does have are 2 supportive older siblings, and a mostly queer friend group. There's a wide variety of queerness on display with this one here, even beyond Lily's trans identity. From gay characters to bi characters to one trans man to Lily herself also being ace. There are hardships, bullies, parents being selfish jerks, and her own anxiety, but our girl persists through it all. And she is such a precious little bean. Must protect. This one is a bit of a heavier read, but much like real life, there is true joy to be found, even when the author turns into a mouse. Don't ask. Continuing the trauma trend, Inside Out: A Trans Tale. No relation to the Pixar movies. This one is a manga, so you'll have to read it backwards. Don't worry, you can get used to it very easily. Once again, we have a trans girl going on a journey of self-discovery, but this time it's a bit different because Haru already knows full well that she's trans and isn't able to act on that desire due to the environment she's in. With some encouragement, she starts trying some things out, but that quickly comes back to bite her when her parents find out, and she gets kicked out of the house. Over text messages, of all things. She has to seek housing from a friend, and while she's there, she has supportive people around her, and she slowly recovers from her parents' treatment. She does not yet have the confidence to call herself a girl like her friend Kyoko, who encouraged her to try things out in the first place, but she is getting better. This story is not finished yet, but even as it is, it's a heartwarming read. Next up, we've got another one of my personal favorite comics in this video, Motherly Vibes. Our focal character this time is a fully grown trans woman named Charlotte, and she wishes she could become a mother, and seeing an old friend with a kid doesn't make her feel any better about that. And that's without considering all her anxiety. She constantly worries about judgment from those around her, especially her friend, and other people in the bathroom. It's also implied that she's separated from her family due to transphobia, and started transitioning and living on her own at the age of 18. The creators of this one are still looking for support, so please send Patreon help if you can. My last 2 recommendations for trans women are less long-term narratives, but they're part of a little subcategory I like to call episodic slice of life, usually much shorter in length than the narrative-focused comics I've been talking about thus far. And of those, I've got 2 I'm happy recommending: Wake Up and Start and Transincidental. Both are, as I said, short-form and episodic, and a lot more autobiographical, with the authors often illustrating stories that actually happened to them. Though there are some entirely fictional stories that illustrate a particular idea, or aspect of trans life. There are also some story arcs I find pretty fun, like The Realization. Christy, the author of Transincidental, could really use some support right now, so I highly recommend giving her comic a read, and getting some merch if there's any still available. The same is also true to an extent for Wake Up and Start, though Ash has recently started putting out pages again. That's all I have for comics that are mainly focused on trans women and girls. If there are any I missed, please feel free to leave them in the comments. Now boys and Transmask NBs, I know you've been waiting patiently, or you just skipped here with the time code, but either way, it's your turn now. To start off, I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention Magical Boy Friends with Benefits and its sequel Friends with Solitude, which is now completed. I already talked about all of these in last year's video, so go watch that if you want to hear more. Also, those first 2 have physical releases if that's something you want. Though I feel the need to say here, the author of Magical Boy is a trans man, and I stupidly forgot to double check that before saying the opposite in the video. Cow, if you're watching this, I am so sorry. Our first new recommendation is What Sexual? Content warning with this one. It's pretty dark, and contains themes of self-unaliving and self-harm. What Sexual is about a trans guy named Tyler who is neck-deep in gender dysphoria without really understanding what he needs, and is helped along in his gender journey by a bi man named Casey. Both of them are dealing with serious personal issues. Tyler has a troubled relationship with his parents who don't really understand him, and Casey is processing the loss of his sister, who was a trans girl dealing with a lack of acceptance. In fact, helping Tyler brings a lot of these memories to the forefront with Casey, and it's not pretty. They come together and are torn apart a few times over the course of the story, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel for both of them. Life sucks a lot at times, but it doesn't have to stay that way. With that, let's get to the next category. Transmasculine webcomics with a bit more of a shorter slice of life autobiographical edge. Basically the masculine equivalent of Wake Up and Start and Transincidental. The first one of those is Hyperfocus. This comic is one of very few I've talked about today that made it to Webtoon Originals, meaning it's been successful enough to be selected as one of the officially promoted comics by the platform. It's one of the first trans webcomics I ever read, and it's one of my personal favorites. Needless to say, it's good. It's mostly about this guy named Kip, the author detailing many of the little moments throughout his life, understanding who he is, how he started transitioning, confusing parts of his past that make so much more sense in hindsight, and what's happened to him during transition. What's really fascinating to me is Kip noticing all the different ways people treat him after he's been on testosterone for a while. There's a lot of chapters written and drawn by guest authors with their own identities, including a crossover with Wake Up and Start, which is how I found out about that. Some of these guest authors are also trans men or non-binary, though some are trans women, but the primary focus of the comic is the transmasculine perspective. Kip also has a few pages about the aro-ace side of his identity, and all the misconceptions that can come from it. In fact, it's the third comic in this video that combines aceness and transness. Is there a connection there? I'll have to look into that later. Hyperfocus is not the deepest comic on this list, but Kip puts a lot of effort into each one, and you'll often catch yourself binging page after page after page. Moving on to a slightly more narrative-focused comic, True and Me, a comic I had been meaning to read for quite a while. This comic has a more minimalistic art style, but it does some interesting things when color is used to convey the tone of certain moments. True and Me asks the question, what if your true self jumped out of the mirror to show you what you really need? Our boy this time knows he's trans from get-go, but he also loves presenting femininely. This often causes a lot of anxiety when he wants to still be perceived as a man, but that's difficult when you're early in transition and need to put more effort into passing. There is some good news though. He is able to get on a list to get top surgery, and eventually, he gets it. That countdown though. Okay, I didn't know this when I started writing the script, but True and Me has been selected to join Webtoon Originals, meaning we are probably going to be getting a higher quality rerun and most likely more pages, so look forward to that. Regardless, True and Me is not the most wholesome comic in this video, but it isn't really all that dramatic either. It's easy reading, relatively speaking, but the experience is worthwhile. Lastly, we've got 3 more short episodic semi-autobiographic slice-of-life comics, though they are a bit less dramatic than the comics I just discussed, or even Wake Up and Start and Transincidental. They are Transcriptor, Trans Talk, and my personal favorite of the 3, Trans Thoughts. None of them are ongoing, at least right now. The latter 2 seem to be on indefinite hiatus. I don't have too much to say about them, but there's a lot of fun insights into each of their experiences. Though I must say, I like the calm portrayal of transitioning at work in Transcriptor, and Scott's sass in Trans Thoughts. Now that I think about it, a lot of these authors, including the trans femme authors from the last section, clearly made these at least in part to document their transitions. That's something I'm sure a lot of us have done through various methods, like YouTube videos or photos or journal entries, just in comic form. Okay, now we're finally onto the fantasy comics, 3 comics that aren't necessarily written by trans folks, but contain at least one well-written trans character or theme, though the first of those has one more trans guy. And for those of you who recognize that art style, yes, you are correct, and thus we finally come to the reason I'm sure most of you clicked on this video. Ahem. He is a nerd for history and really likes to praise the domes. She reads the classics and the myths and talks about a lot of tropes. To help you learn your history, mythology, and tropes and such to overly sarcastic asexuals who talk too much. Ugh, that was terrible. How on earth did Red handle all that variation? Anyways, most of you probably know about overly sarcastic productions by now. If not, what the fuck is wrong with you? Go watch them, right now! Or wait until this video is done. For those who somehow don't know, or do know them but have not read Aurora, it's the comic by Red, no real name given, unlike her friend, who is the artist behind most of the visuals at OSP. Red says she got the idea from a book of fantasy tropes and wanted to make a fantasy story that was more superhero-coded and lighter to tone in contrast to the grimdark that was more popular a few years ago, before Game of Thrones ended. Being a big OSP fan who has seen most of their videos, I was able to see a lot of Red's influences in the comics because she talks about them in Trope Talk. The heroic nature of the main characters, combined with their character development, was absolutely inspired by the Justice League cartoons, the elemental magic system where several members of the main crew are world-class in their specialized element, and there's this one guy found in the middle of nowhere who knows all the elements and has some special destinies, clearly from Avatar, and the city gods thing reminds me a lot of the gods of Discworld. I can't confirm all of those elements were inspired by those stories, consciously or unconsciously, but they give me a similar vibe. That isn't an insult. I do love all of those stories. OSP made a video about this exact sort of inspiration and why artists do it, though Red's obsession with space and the stars is largely absent. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, given that she's a card-carrying astrology disliker. Actually, now that I think about it, that sort of obsession would make a great inspiration for a fantasy story. Anyways, what's Aurora actually about? Well, it's about this guy, Kendall, who used to be the vessel of one of the city gods, that being a god named Vash, who is taken by this mad sorceress lady at the beginning of the story, and is going on a journey to try and save him. Along the way, he meets quite the colorful cast, and I mean that both literally and figuratively. The world building here is also pretty decent, something the vast majority of fantasy webcomics, even high fantasy ones, don't bother with. The creation myth is fairly cliche, but not in a bad way. The elemental magic system is also fairly cliche, but there are a lot more wrinkles there. Most important for us today is this guy, Dynix, probably my favorite character in this series, who's from a tribe of desert warriors, and after he transitioned there, it left his body without the ability to channel magic. Not that he needs it since he's plenty capable on his own. When our main crew finds him, he's fighting in an arena at the behest of one of the people in charge, and has to help the crew break out when things get stormy, for a lack of a better word. Oh, and he can transform into this badass fire elemental that wrecks almost anything in his way. He does need a bit of time adjusting to the group dynamic of the party, but after that last segment of Arc 1, which is as far as I've read at the time of writing this, he has. And I look forward to his interactions with the group going forward. I must say, I really like the sealing of his soul channels as a permanent change that came with transitioning. As in the real world, sometimes transitioning means sacrificing something that you like. I miss being able to sleep face down. Our last two comics go past the simple use of the fantasy setting and actually use its inherent alien nature to explore gender in a society that has developed completely different from our own. Our next one is the most overt case of this, Fluidium, a comic in which none of the characters are trans, in the way we just described, and yet, simultaneously, all of them are. This is a universe in which every living being is born with two bodies, one male and one female, and everyone uses they-them pronouns by default, which sounds like a dream for many of us. Well, guess what? You only get to keep both bodies until the age of 21, at which point whichever body is currently occupied will stick around, and whichever is unoccupied disintegrates. Also, if you die in one body, you are permanently forced into the other, assuming it's still around. The choice, as it were, is a big part of the culture in this world, and it informs most of the characters' decisions, especially our main character Jessie, who can't seem to decide which body they want to stay in for the rest of their life, no matter how much experimenting they do, thus showing us a society less restrictive than our own, but still has rules that make life more difficult for some people. Jessie starts looking into a way to keep both of their bodies with the help of some friends, but as they do this, a cult begins emerging from the shadows. A cult with deep ties to this entire society, a cult whose entire core belief is based on the choice. There's also other groups and even whole countries with their own culture based on the choice, and different takes on the very idea of gender, which makes for some fascinating commentary that tends to go over most people's heads, even non-binary people like myself. It makes the world feel more alive while also expanding on its core themes. This story's take on gender honestly reminds me a lot of The Left Hand of Darkness. Good stuff. Alright, I've avoided rankings with this video thus far, but this time I've saved the best for last. A fantasy comic every bit as well drawn as Magical Boy, with a world as well built as Aurora, and themes around the very idea of gender every bit as strong as Fluidium. Ladies, gentlemen, and fellow NBs, I give you... Realta, one of my all-time personal favorite webcomics, let alone webtoons. So what the heck is this thing that I would praise it so much? If I had to put it simply, it's like Avatar: The Last Airbender, but you removed all the Eastern culture and folklore and replaced it with Western astrology and European folklore. A long time ago, humans were getting attacked by the Fae, and so the constellations, which are sort of like minor gods in this world, chose to bless them, which transformed them to more resemble their astrological sun sign. To any OSP fans, or anyone from OSP who's still watching at this point, the goatfish in this story do not time travel. To my knowledge, at least. While everyone in this world reincarnates into the clan associated with the sun sign at their moment of death, there are 14 people, known as the Realta, who always reincarnate into the same clan, and they possess special power granted to them by a star. Also, this world is completely different from ours, and saying your pronouns when you introduce yourself is commonplace. There's also a lot of existing knowledge about gender and sexuality. Rachel Eaton actually posts these little bios for all the characters, including their sexual orientation and their romantic orientation if the two diverge. Yes, those are two different things. She also posts these info pages for each of the clans, so if your sun sign hasn't shown up in the story yet, you can see what they're like. They're also all compiled into a book if you'd prefer that. Our main character here is Elowyn of the Virgo, a non-binary lead who has grown up in isolation with their grandfather, on a farm surrounded by this magic mist that will kill anything that tries to stick its head out too far. After 20 years, Elowyn grows up, but their grandfather unfortunately is not able to stick around. With his passing, Elowyn ventures out into the world in search of their parents and the rest of the Virgo clan. Unfortunately, the world they find is not the same as the world they were told of. For one thing, magic, something that was core to Elowyn when they were growing up, is completely outlawed in the current world. Technology is advancing, but the Fae are still active, and they are becoming more aggressive. And as they find out in a very rude awakening, it's actually been 1,000 years since Elowyn went into their grandfather's farm. And as you probably guessed, the instant they were introduced, Elowyn is the Virgo Realta, and they, along with their new friend Amelia, who is the Capricorn Realta, have been taken in by this group of all the other known Realta of the time, who have all gotten wind of the fact that there is something very sinister afoot in the world. TLDR, they've been anged! And the Avatar comparisons don't end there. But I've brought it up enough in this video, and I don't want to spoil too much of the plot, so let's move on. Elowyn and friends now need to evade capture by the anti-magic establishment, figure out what is going on with the Fae, and find the other Realta using a magical device that can detect them at each annual clan festival, which means they need to travel to each kingdom at the right time. This leads to them seeing just how much the world has been changed by technology. It has genuinely helped people in a lot of ways, but it also led to people becoming less in tune with nature and magic. Kind of like Lord of the Rings, but with a little more sci-fi touch. Fortunately, Elowyn and co do know a thing or two about magic, which brings me to my next point. The magic system in this series is pure genius in concept. We haven't seen the full extent of what it can do, so if you've looked into astrology enough, you might know that each of the 12 signs has an association with one of the 4 Greek elements. Again, Avatar. And the people don't just have sun signs based on the time of year they were born, they also have moon signs, which are assigned based on the phase of the moon of the day they were born, and rising signs based on the time of day they were born. Those are actually concepts in astrology. This comic actually got me to learn more about astrology than I ever cared to know before, but because this is a fantasy world, it's actually real, and horoscopes, which can be delivered by the Realta, are more like prophecies. But wait, there's more! Your sun, moon, and rising signs determine what 3 elements you can use naturally if your blood is purple. If your blood is purple, then magic is innate. If it's red, something that's more common in the current time of the world, you can't use magic naturally. But if you have a magic item enchanted with the right element, you can use magic associated with that element, even if your blood is red. Your sun sign determines your primary element, and your moon sign determines which element reacts to your emotions. Now, as a Sagittarius, who will never say no to fire powers in a fantasy story and loves intricate magic systems, thanks Brandon and Tim, I adore this idea. By using a real-world pseudoscience, it inherently comes with a lot of existing ideas that most people already know, while building off of them in a really unique way. And if you don't care about astrology, you can just ignore it. It's just another part of the setting. And all of that is just the world and main plot. I haven't even gotten to the main cast yet, aside from Elowyn's backstory. Elowyn and the other Realta each get some time in the spotlight. Each one has a personal history and other characters we meet during the journey who tie into it. Well, except the Gemini boys. As of right now, they're kind of just the comic relief. Amelia, for example, knows magic can be used for good, but her adopted father disagrees and is worried she might be taken if caught associating with it. She's probably my favorite character in the series at this point, and also she's developed feelings for Elowen, who on top of everything I've already gone over, also goes through a gender identity crisis. Getting to experience the world has also led them to trying a more feminine presentation, and it's led to them experiencing some gender euphoria. They even get called out for it. But as all of us know, personal identity takes time to form, even multiple seasons in. Also, as a quick side note, Virgo can have wings in this world, but only Virgo women. Unlike the Gelflings in Dark Crystal, however, there's an asterisk on that. Transgender Virgos can choose to get wings upon transition. Leave your predictions in the comments. Phew! That was a lot more than I expected to write about that series. Anyways, it was nice to finally get to talk about my passion for the wild world of webcomics, especially with the bad rap they have on YouTube. No matter your gender, or even if you don't know your gender, I hope you at least found one thing that you'll enjoy. Now before I sign out for the day, I feel the need to remind you all one last time. Things are bad for us right now. Very bad even. But that doesn't mean it's all over. People like us will always exist. The rest of the world only needs time to catch up. To my fellow trans folks still watching, I ask of you only this. Survive, and protest however you can. I'm Kylan Mythos, and I will see you all next time.